Welcome to our Tuesday night podcast. My name is Jordan, and I will be hosting tonight, asking questions. This is Pastor Ford.
All right. Oh, I'm not there yet.
And he will,
Down
there
there.
he is. All right. Okay, well, I feel like we should talk about the woke church. It's going to be you're going to be preaching on this, aren't you?
Maybe.
So maybe. Yeah, right. We get to see the titles ahead of time, so I'm sure I'll find out about this soon. If it's not, maybe we'll do the next podcast on it, if I don't get in trouble. All right. Tonight we're going to be talking about when God shows up. When does God show up? What does that even mean? For those of you that don't believe in God and don't see any evidence of him, where is the evidence? If God's real, how come we can't see him? How come we can't feel him, hear him? How come we can't go up and touch him and call him on the phone and text him? Where is God? That's really kind of the basis of this whole question. And so first I want to deal with there's two cliches that came into my mind. The one is, the stereotypical, and I'm using that word on purpose, but God showed up right before I died and did a miracle. And now I believe in him because, it was right up until the edge. It was right up until I was going to jump off the cliff. And then somebody came and told me about Jesus, and I was going to, I was going to kill myself, but God showed himself to me right before I did that. And so then on the flip side, you have this idea that I've been living this way, and a way that you call sinful for years, and God's never come and struck me with lightning or wrote messages on my wall with blood. I've never seen a crucifix pop out of thin air. It just doesn't. Where is God? And so these are kind of the two extreme angles I'm trying to come from with this question, because it seems like, and you can see this all through Scripture, that man can be going along and living a certain way, doing a certain thing, whether good or bad, and then there are these times where God just kind of does something supernatural, and he, everything from, like I said, the cliche miracle, and God does something miraculous, and then the other side where God just literally kills somebody. And so where is God in everyday life, and how often does God kind of show up, or is he just kind of there as an undertone, or is he there like controlling everything? Do you see kind of the direction I'm going with the question?
Yeah.
Okay, so when doing wrong, let's start from that perspective. When man is sinning, how many times do you have to sin to offend God? Just start there.
Yeah. As many as it takes.
That's a very open question.
Yeah, there's no numbers. It's just the reality of. I was, you were introducing the topic, but the thought that came into my mind is we see how often God is involved. We see thousands of years of the Old Testament, and if you think about these at the moment, nobody knew that the stuff was going to be written down. It wasn't like,
Yeah.
that, Adam and Eve said, okay, we need to keep records of this because God's going to want us to write this down later on. No, Moses wrote a lot of that, and so that was, 2,500 years later that Moses writes down the things that happened in the beginning, and so he's kind of 2,500 years behind, but yet, why does he have such perfect recall? Well, because God told him this is what happened. Because God was there, for all of that, and God was keeping records of all that. And so that's, I think, that probably the most important element to keep in mind when we're talking about God being somewhere is God is there. He's always there. He's never not there. The issue of his felt presence is a whole nother story.
Yeah.
But he's always there. And there's nothing that gets God involved, as it were, in a circumstance because of some specific thing that we do that obligates God to get involved. He's provided ways like through prayer and things like that where we can see God's involvement in things in our lives. But God's choice to become active in a circumstance that's his prerogative.
Mm-hmm. So what is, because you see this actually you mentioned Moses, so let's kind of start, a little bit before that time frame, but there's there's the story of Joseph. Joseph is a really good example of this, because Joseph is, the Bible literally depicts him as a righteous man. He's and he's doing right when nobody's looking, and he's doing right when it would almost be justified to do the wrong thing, and he's making decisions on his own. And the Bible actually specifically says, and the Lord was with him. We've talked a little bit about this before, but it's interesting because he gets like this vision. I think actually that might have been the context we talked about this last, but the idea of vision. He gets this vision, or he has a dream that his parents and his brothers, his older brothers, are all bowing down to him, and then he ends up getting sold into slavery, and years and years and years down the road, offense after assault and insult, and going through all kinds of crazy stuff. He ends up being second man in charge, basically, of the world power at the time, which is in Egypt. And so he's the man. But for years before that, he was definitely not the man. But in God's eyes, he was. And so what is it about a person that attracts God's attention like that, to where you have this kind of sustaining God's involvement? And there are times where God actively gets involved. For instance, this whole situation with Potiphar's wife. For those of you that don't know the story, he's now the servant of a man in Egypt, and the man's wife has a thing for Joseph, and so she tries to take him to bed, and he flees. She grabs his jacket. Now he's accused of rape, and instead of Potiphar killing him, he throws him in prison, which is very clearly in my mind anyway, a miracle. God kept him alive. God just stayed the hand of who he could have probably rightfully killed him and not have any problem with it. But the fact is that God was involved in his life actively, and there were times where he actively got involved. What is it that attracts God's attention like that?
Okay, so now you're talking about something that's a little bit different, and I think very, very important to keep in mind is that God is involved in every person's life. And so that, what you're seeing there of like the fact that Joseph wasn't killed, that God is involved. Nobody's making decisions outside of God's allowance, which is something that many people have a problem with.
That's interesting. Yeah. Okay. Clarify that or explain it.
Yeah. Well, everything has to pass through God. Nothing happens outside. It's not, God doesn't just go, well, it's nothing to do with me. He's not signing off on every act of man.
Right.
But at the same time, he's nothing is getting past him. And so, these, again, I was having this conversation yesterday. We're talking about very complex matters here, and we can tend to be very childlike. Very childish is probably a better way of saying it. Very childish when it comes to our thinking. Like people saying, if God is real, then why are there so many problems in the world? That's such a childish way of thinking, because it is just so ignorant to how complicated the world is. It's just, it goes back. The thought that's in my mind is, when a kid wants something, and the parents say, well, we can't afford it. We don't have the money for it. And then the kid just says, well, write a check, because they're ignorant. They don't know something, and that's silly. And when they get to be adults, they'll be embarrassed by thinking that way, because it's such a silly idea to think that way. But as adults, we do that when it comes to God, is we want to know why God doesn't just write checks, and not to take into consideration the complexity of the world that we live in, and how the importance of a decision, the ramifications of a decision, even the old, idea, the, Eastern, idea of the butterfly, flapping its wings, causing a tornado somewhere else, just the reality of the consequences of things, and how things play out in people's lives, the precariousness of life, some decision. Why doesn't God just, might mean a fallout of all kinds of, levels of consequences, that God says, no, I think it's better for me to just stay out of this one and let things play out this way instead, rather than to go in and shift things around. And so there are times where God shifts things around, and then there are other times where God just allows things to happen. Mm-hmm. So, but that it's because of the consequences of actions, I think are very important to keep in mind, that the world is very, very complicated. The running of the world is a very complex thing. Mm-hmm. And that it isn't just God can just do this and just do that. That there are other dynamics that are at work, like Joseph becoming second. You can always look at this stuff going backwards, and Joseph becoming second to Egypt as a spoiled brat would be the big disaster. Which is how he started off.
Interesting. Yeah.
He started off as having this dream. And telling his brothers about it. And his dad, he was a favorite, with his dad. His brothers were jealous. The reason why they even did what they did to him was because of jealousy, because their father had shown favoritism towards him. And so put that, in, second over Egypt, and then what do you have? You have some really horrible stuff. And so that whole season of his life, could very well have been the preparation in order to be second over all of Egypt with some sort of credential and character.
Yeah, so Brian's got a question here. Is there any reason or benefit in questioning someone's claim that God intervened, like getting a good price on a used couch or car or on Craigslist, or something that happens to everyone fairly often? Or are these direct actions of God?
Well, you just hit my soapbox. I should probably put away. But I'm not.
Wait. No.
I'm not.
There's not even a clarification. You're going to preach on this now. You can't just hold the info away.
Yeah, I'm not. No. I'm talking about this thing in particular. I'm not a big fan of people talking about God blessing them with things that do happen in ordinary life, especially when it seems to be that nobody ever talks about God blessing them by not giving them the bargain on Craigslist. The 1,500 things that they tried to get that they didn't get.
Yeah.
Or the used car that they really needed and never happened. And so they ended up without a car for 6 weeks. You don't hear people saying God bless me like that. It's always the discount. God bless me with a discount. God bless me with a bargain type thinking. And it's just not something that I am a big fan of. And I think that probably causes a lot of non-believers to mock Christianity when that's the case, because there's so many Christians that do that. It's, there are times where it's good to be, to be thankful. Being thankful is fine. There's nothing about being thankful, but attributing something to God actually doing it when you don't even know that God did it, just because what does it really say? This is the kind of thing. So when I hear somebody talk about some circumstance of something that's sort of an ordinary affair of life, and they talk about that it was actually God who did it, I have to ask myself, what do they think about themselves with God? Do they think they're like a favored child? Is that what they think? They think, because what about these other people who don't, these kinds of things are not happening to them? Aren't you not, it's funny because I've seen these kinds of testimonies, and I know of people who regularly testify like this. And for me, it's always been a thing of where in my mind, I think, I kind of play it out in my mind is basically what they're saying is I just want everybody to know how special I am, and you're not special, because that never happened to you. I'm special, but you're not. And that's why I've got this blessing, is because God actually loves me more than he loves you. What really is the end goal, in standing up and telling people something that happened to you that happens to a lot of people, but it didn't just happen to you. God did it, Why do you want to do that? What's the motivating factor behind that? It's one thing, we're praying for people and we're praying for somebody to be healed, and then they're healed. And so we thank God for their healing, but it's another thing when you're standing up every Wednesday and talking about the little thought that you had in the back of your mind that God just seems to be running around tirelessly catering to all the time. I wanted this and I got it, and I wanted that and I got it, and I got this thing and I wanted that thing and I wanted the other thing and I wanted the other thing. And so, God's just so good because God just gives me whatever I want in life, and I'm listening to this as a Christian, and I'm thinking, golly, you really do think quite highly of yourself if you think that God's just running around, It has nothing better to do. It's like the world's going to have to wait, because brother so-and-so needs he needs a blessing, so.
Those got a question here. Same thing goes for when we blame the devil, right? For things that happen to us, i.e. sickness, car crash, flat tire, etc. Life happens, doesn't mean the devil is behind it. Thoughts?
Exactly. And that's the other side of the coin that I often talk to people about when I don't go out of my way to try to correct people like this, but when I see people that are within my kind of realm of influence, I more often than not, people who are talking about all the blessings of God that they get, from these day by day things, they're also the ones that are in deep depression, when they get a flat tire or something goes wrong, because they don't understand why God didn't come through, and help with that, because they just don't get the reality that life actually happens. For them, everything happens for a reason. I mean, everything happens for a reason, and so the reason is either God loves me or God hates me, and so then it becomes this light switch of, oh, God must not like me right now because he's not doing anything for me, or he's letting bad things happen to me, and so yeah, and then, obviously the same idea with the devil as well. Whatever supernatural, thing you're saying, to this, and that doesn't mean that God doesn't do things. And that doesn't mean that God doesn't allow things to happen, and that doesn't mean that the devil doesn't do things. I mean, very much these things are realities, but you have to learn, and I think it's part of Christian maturity, is you have to learn that we may live in a spiritual reality, but it's not like, we're not the star of the show. The God and the devil are not fighting over me, and they're going to spend the rest of my life locked in battle, over me, to make sure that I'm happy or to try to hurt me, and I think it's that really is, when I think about it, that really is, I think a lot of the thinking in people's lives or minds is that they think that that's what's happening, is that it's just, I'm just such a awesome person, that God and the devil are fighting over me, and it's just a poor concept at so many levels, and then when that doesn't seem to be the case, it's like, oh, I guess I'm not that, great.
Yeah.
And then you're in depression, so it's like, you're either testifying on Wednesday or you're at the doctor on Monday.
Yeah.
Getting your Xanax prescription fulfilled. I mean, so you at some point, you're going to have to just realize, hey, life happens.
Yeah. Okay. So that brings up a couple of other questions then. So how do you determine, not the difference between an act of God and an act of the devil, but how do you determine what is actually an act of God and what is just normal life? And then on the flip side, what is the devil actually working against somebody, and what's just, hey, you're stupid decisions leading to this?
Yeah. Well, me personally, what I do is I'm always looking for the signature, because what I've noticed is when God does things, he says, this is from God. He signs it in the corner, and that's how you know. And then the devil, he says, I did this, signed the devil. No, I mean, there really isn't. You really don't have any guarantee, for those kinds of things, whether it's God or the devil or just life. There's no real guarantee, when it comes to those kinds of things. And so I always,
but I mean, like just to interject a little bit, there are moments in the Bible where God says, "I'm going to do this so that they know there is a God in Israel."
Right.
So there are things that God does that are clearly God saying, "This is me. I'm here."
Right.
And I think the devil's probably on the opposite end. He's trying to do things, but stay somewhat hidden for it.
Yeah.
And be deceptive.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, there's obviously a truth in that, but you're not talking. Listen. You're talking about a book that covers thousands of years.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Of history.
Yeah.
And then you have these moments, where God says stuff like that. So I mean, there's lots of day-to-day grind that is not recorded in the Bible. And so yes, I mean, there are those moments, but that's what I mean is that because those moments are, you don't. I've been saved long enough, to know that the majority of the times, how I discover whether it's God or the devil is usually after the fact. It's never rarely during,
hindsight,
and usually really far after.
Yeah.
And when I look backwards and I think, man, God was really in that, or that was really demonic, But in the moment, it's like I don't really know. I don't have any idea.
Yeah. Brian's got a question here again. By the way, let me just stop. And I didn't say this in the beginning, but if you're new to the podcast or if you've never done this before on our podcast, we invite you to ask questions like Brian and Daniel are asking. Please feel free to throw those in there. They don't have to be on topic. Throw them in there, and we will work them in as we see them come in. There's usually about a 30-second delay, but if you put those in there, we will see them, and we will answer your question. So Brian's asking, can we use salvation as a reference where everything changes, not just one thing?
Yeah, seeing the hand of God on something is, again, these you're talking things that man can't do. That's really the only time that we really can have a confidence that yes, because man could not do this, but that doesn't, there's so many things that, man can do. I found a deal on Craigslist, that's why do we need to attach God's name to that?
Right.
Why is that necessary? Well, we want to give God the glory for everything. I think God would be okay with us being able to find something, in the supermarket,
Really?
I was walking down the aisle and, I really felt like, I wanted, cornflakes and they were out, but I saw over in the corner where nobody was looking, I saw a box of cornflakes and I knew it was God. It was like, why do we have to have that? Why is it? I mean, again, it's just all this silly little, favoritism thing. It doesn't. If you're not going to have cornflakes, who cares? But so yeah. I mean, that's a thing. When it's there's times when it's clearly something that God is doing. And it's not something that man is doing. But there's not always that kind of clarity. And so my point is that, the idea of trying to attribute things to God, I don't see God telling us that we have to do that, that we have to stand up and tell people God did this, when it comes to things, unless it's quite clear that that God would be glorified in that, praying for, like we prayed for, we've been praying for, Lola Miller for, almost a year now, I think. It's gone by so fast. At least 6 months for sure. No, actually, it was probably October-ish, I think, because Elliot was here at the time. So I think it was kind of October-ish. And praying for her, and the recovery was really slow from the stroke and things like that. But as I'm praying, I feel like, I'm praying for the stroke, and there's it's a little bit kind of thing. But I'm praying and I'm saying, God, okay, I want to really focus on the core issue. And so the issue of praying for her, I began to pray for her specifically for lupus. And I had asked her husband, I said, because I just kind of check in. It got to a thing where I'm just maybe texting every month or two, hey, how are things going? We're still praying. And I said, I want to know specifically about her lupus. And he said, funny you should say that, because she just went into the doctor, and the doctor said that her blood work looks very, very good. This is after just having had a stroke 6 months ago. her blood work looks very, very good, and they're going to reduce, or they did reduce her steroid medication, which steroids, anybody who's familiar with that, steroids, that it just prolongs the inevitable, because if you have to regularly take a steroid drug, it's that the steroid drug's going to kill you, because it has very adverse effects on your organs. We can't have, a lifelong medication on steroids. And so they know that she's going to die from the steroid medication at some point. She's going to start having organ failure. Well, and I mean, what is she, in her 30s, I think. And so he said that basically, that the doctor said they've reduced her amount, and they're going to check her again in 5 months. And when they check her in 5 months, if she's still doing as well as she's doing now, they're going to stop her medication, which she's been on for something like 20 years. She's been living on this medication since she was 15 years old. Wow. So that's genuinely a miracle. Mm-hmm. There's a genuine reality there. That's something that you can testify about. You can genuinely have, give glory to God, because this was something where, it's being prayed for. And truthfully, as I'm praying for it, I'm praying more like, God, we've been praying a long time for this girl. She really needs a miracle. And then this happens, and it's like, yes, God has clearly done something, because, you don't just take steroids for 20 years and then all of a sudden magic happens, and you don't need the steroid medication anymore. You don't just turn around, especially if you've had a stroke. This is her second stroke as well. So they didn't even think she was going to survive this one. So there are things that are clearly God. You can see this is God moving, and we can give God glory for that, because that's quite clearly something that's of God. But the idea that, these nebulous ideas should get equal credit is, I think that demeans those times. Mm. When somebody's talking about how, every 2 or 3 days, God's, blessing them with toys. Yeah. And then they come and talk about how God has, they thought that they might have had some sort of a thing, and they went to the doctor, and the doctor said, no, you don't have that. And so I just want to give God the glory. That just, well, maybe God did something, maybe he didn't, because, we can't tell with you anyway, because everything's God. We don't know what's God and what isn't. So you see what I'm saying is that when you get this mentality that everything has to be God, then you don't know when things are God and when they're not.
So it kind of just waters everything
down.
It
just becomes, maybe not, because everything else you say, it's almost kind of like the whole story of crying wolf. You do that for long enough.
Yes.
People aren't listening to you anymore.
Yeah. Okay. So again, everything you've been saying is kind of just bringing up these questions now, and so we've kind of gone in a little bit of a different direction than the first part of this was supposed to go, but this is great, because the question now is, so just go back to Joseph again. The questions in my mind of how important is one man to God versus, like you're saying, this isn't about being like a spoiled child, but, there are these select people throughout the Bible that the Bible highlights. And it's very interesting to see how God acts in their, or, gets involved in their lives specifically.
That's a hard question, because that to me is a question that kind of usually draws out an emotional answer and not a logical, reasonable answer. How important is a person to God? And the first thought
let me pitch it like this then, because maybe it'll make it this. These are the two things that are in my mind, because is it that God favors one person over another? I mean, not from the standpoint of favoritism, but, gets involved in one person's life for this specific purpose, because I was thinking about Moses, I was thinking about Joseph, and in both of their lives, although the story was about Joseph, and, in a lot of ways, the highlight of the story of Israel, getting pulled out of Egypt was very much, this relationship between God and Moses, but both of those stories involved what God was doing for a mass of people, not just one person.
Yeah.
The book of Jonah is another great example of that, because the book's called Jonah, but in reality, the book's not really about Jonah. It's about Nineveh, which is a mass of people. And so is it that God favors one person, or is it always the fact that...
All right. Well, that I can answer. That one, that doesn't require an emotional response. I think both. I don't, So the first thought that came to my mind when you said, how important is a man to God is quite obviously important because he made Adam. He didn't start with atoms.
Yeah.
He didn't just make 100 atoms. He made one. And so there's I think of it from the standpoint of the difference between mass production and, handcrafting.
Handcrafting, yeah.
That kind of a thing that shows, the importance of the individual to God is that each one of us is handcrafted. No two people are identical. And so there's a handcrafting there so that, God recognizes us as individuals. He doesn't see us as part of a collective. Mm-hmm. That I can, we can talk about that because that's not an emotional issue. I don't think the idea of Joseph is for the greater good of Egypt exclusively.
Right.
That the two went hand in hand. Is that there's a man because we're getting into realms that are I love thinking about this kind of stuff because I've just simply learned how to think about things in a more loose way so that I can understand stuff like infinity and all-knowing, all-powerful God and things like that. That I'm okay with it, but God knows everything that's going to happen, and so He knows what kind of person Joseph's going to be. Before He actually puts this thing into process with Joseph, He knows where this is all going to end up, and so so Joseph is a candidate for this appointment. Where his brothers probably weren't. I mean, just judging from the kind of decisions they did make, that they wouldn't have been the appropriate person for the appointment. But again, you can't just say God knew everything was going to come out rosy. It's the idea, because sometimes things are really ugly, and sometimes God has, the Bible talks about God having vessels to honor and vessels to dishonor. In other words, he'll use wicked people just as much as he'll use righteous people to get His will done. And so because He knows that even though that person is wicked, He knows they're going to do what needs to be done in order to fulfill the purpose that He's after, but doing it out of their own volition. And so that's the thing. I think it's like I said, trying to understand these things loosely, to hang on to these kinds of truths loosely. So it wasn't that God looked down and looked at Joseph and said, "Oh, Joseph's this cool guy, and he's just going to pull everything off just the way I want to, and that's the kind of person I like to use." It's not some sort of exclusive thing like that. But Joseph would fit the purpose. He was the man for the hour, and that's why we read of his story. And for every Joseph, there may be 100 people that are in similar circumstances, but would have never really played out in the kind of way that Joseph played out. And so, but God knows these things, and God is involved, and God is working with these people, and there's destiny that's associated with these things as well. That God has destiny, purpose. He's created people with these destinies. Again, these are kinds of concepts you have to really hang on to really loosely, because if you try to box in, and say, "Oh, that's how God works." Well, now you've just crossed the line, because there's no such thing as that's how God works. But we can have loose concepts as to how God works, looking at His Word and how He functions. Look at Adam. He knew Adam was going to screw up, but He still made Adam first.
Yeah.
Because of a big picture, He knew where He was going, with everything, and so there's a whole history there in God's head. This is how things are going to have to go in order for this to work out in the end, for God's will to be established. It's going to be very complicated, and it's going to be very messy. But in the end, is one of the answers that I always give to, if God's such a loving God, then why is there so much, pain and suffering in the world? Is that the answer is, this is the best plan. There isn't a better one. And if you think of things like us being made in the image of God, meaning that we have autonomy, what other way could it have been done? So if God just pre-programmed the universe, and the universe just did everything He wanted it to do the way He wanted it to go, well, we wouldn't be autonomous. We would just be robotic. And we would just, there'd be no point in trying to have a gospel story, or God reaching into humanity as a father or any of those kinds of things, because it's you're not a father to something that does not have the ability to function independently. I think we can see this a little bit with some of the progress that we've had with AI. There's a real cool element to AI. If you've ever seen any of I can't remember the name of the robot, but the one that's become kind of the most famous AI robot's been actually going through interviews and has been interviewed by news, professional interviewers. And then the robot will just say something really off the wall, just bizarre off the wall. And then the interviewer will go, "Why did you say that?" And then the robot will say, "Well, I said that because it seemed like the right thing to say." So there's this little bit of independence there that is almost kind of cool, and so, and the reason is because it's human. We're looking at something that's human, and that's why we think that kind of a thing is cool. And so that was God's intention of making humans, is that there would be some autonomy, to our existence, and that so heaven is going to be people who want to be there, who want to live a heavenly way, who want to have relationship with God, and who want to live the way that God has created the world to work. And so you've got this environment that's, like I said, it's very ugly, it's very messy, and there's pain and suffering associated with it. But when you look at the end result, and it's not an issue of the ends justify the means, because that's not the issue. The issue is this is the only way to have this kind of eternity, so it's not a justification. It's that this was the way, because the truth of the matter is if there was another way, then God would have done it, And so that's what we're kind of talking about here, is talking about the idea of God being involved in things. Is God being involved in things in such a way that still maintains or allows us to have the power of decision, in the process.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to come back to that. Kay's got a question here. Might be off topic. It's actually not too off topic, but what is meant by God move? To me, it sounds like I'm telling him what to do, which sounds wrong. Actually,
that it can be. Yeah, it can be when you go about it the wrong way, but praying, God invites us to do that, though. I mean, there's biblically, you can see, Jesus, the number of times he talked about asking, and James says you have not because you ask not. And he qualifies that by saying, but sometimes you don't have because you ask amiss. In other words, you're not asking appropriately. So there is a place for respect when it comes to that. But, asking God to move in a circumstance, he invites us to do that. And so that's an appropriate thing to do, to ask God, but it's qualified as well, like the idea of asking amiss, asking to consume something on our own lusts. The good news is that we can ask for things and God will say no. God's not obligated to give us something just because we've asked for it, fortunately, because that could be really disastrous if that was the case.
So you talked about, this idea of decisions. It leaves room for us to make decisions. But let's kind of go into that idea a little bit. There's a principle in Scripture, in this idea of sowing and reaping, and we've talked a lot about that. And it's obviously that's a very common topic throughout the church anyway, because it's so relevant. Sowing and reaping is clearly the decisions we make. But there's this kind of specificity with Paul when he says, do not reap, or do not grow weary in well-doing, or in doing well.
Right.
For in due season you shall reap if you don't lose heart.
Right.
And so the question is, how do you know? And again, this is, I think you could make a very practical application to that scripture. But as well, there's the side where, we are doing something and God gets involved at these moments.
Yeah.
And there are situations and stories and examples we could give from the Bible and from real life experience and watching people come in and try Christianity. And I use that word on purpose,
Right.
but come in and try Christianity, and they start going through the motions. God's doing, you can see very clearly from the outside perspective, God's getting involved in their lives, but they're expecting this thing to happen.
Yeah.
And sometimes they bail and say, this isn't working right before God's about to do something.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's so like disappointing for people trying to help somebody to meet Jesus and to know God personally and to see that God does get involved in people's lives and that there are genuine moments of miracle. But they come in and it's almost like, gosh, if you just hung on a little longer, you would have saw for yourself so clearly what we've been encouraging you for.
Yeah.
And it's almost like what Paul's saying.
Yeah.
He says, don't grow weary in well doing. So first question is, how do you know you're doing well? What is what classifies a good doing? Or is it just like, walking old ladies across the street every day and feeding the homeless and, I don't know, wearing your having like a bleeding heart mentality towards life? Or what is the qualification of that?
You covering a lot of ground. When it comes to that, I would have to refer to just, at a more experiential level of when you are a Christian and you're living for God and you're being obedient to God, and obedience is more than just checking a list of rules. It's deeper than that. There's relationship there, understanding who God is and wanting to do those things, like what Jesus says, I always do those things that please my Father. That's what that's referring to, is the idea of doing well, is the idea of always being pleasing to the Father. And if you live that way, then you will reap, and that's the whole idea, is that you will reap the benefits of that. I had a great opportunity last night to actually be on a podcast that was not Christian. The whole environment was not Christian. And I was so glad to be on that, because I could talk like this, but to non-Christians, and that was one of the things that came up, was, this idea of, obedience and this kind of thing. And just the whole idea of, that we're not just keeping rules. As a Christian, it's not just about keeping rules. It's about becoming like Jesus, and that when Jesus lives inside of you, you have a whole new code of conduct that is inside of you now. When I became a Christian, I was living the party lifestyle, and I didn't have any desire to change that. But when I became a Christian, the next day, I was no longer that way. It wasn't okay. Now that I'm a Christian, I have to stop doing certain things. It was, no, that's not, I can't live that way. I shouldn't live that way. I don't want to live that way. That's probably a better way of saying it. And that was what I was communicating, in this podcast, that whole idea. I didn't want to live that way. I wanted to be pleasing to God. And so I knew that partying was not going to be pleasing to God. Nobody had to show me it in the Bible. I knew that it wasn't. I knew it was wrong, because, Jesus came into my life, and now I had a new standard, for living. And so following that, but that doesn't mean that you're going to, all of a sudden, all of the things that you've ever wanted in life are going to start happening, now, because you're being you're living right. That doesn't automatically mean that you're going to, have everything that you've ever wanted in life. It just simply means that you're on the right path. And whatever happens in life, you're going to be able to one day look back and see the benefits of that. And that's what Paul's talking about, is that you will reap if you don't faint. And so that's the whole idea, is doing good, living the way that God wants us to live, living according to the purposes of God. Our lives focused on that, pursuing destiny, all these kinds of things that we talk about as Christians. When you're doing that, it doesn't mean that you're going to be able to just all of a sudden, your dreams are going to come true. But what it will do is as you look backwards, is you'll realize, wow, I've been I've been living on the right side. I've been experiencing the good life. The benefits of the good life. It's like the thing I said on Sunday. About when I started wearing my seatbelt and not rolling stop signs and not going over the speed limit. All of a sudden, it was like magic. The police turned a blind eye to my behavior. No, that's not what happened. They didn't turn a blind eye to my behavior. There was no need for them to look at me anymore, And so that's what I'm talking about is that understanding that, you're not having to always, pay the price, for stupid decisions, when you're living right, you're not having to, it's not that I had this sort of in my own life, get a car, get a job, get a girlfriend, get in a fight with my girlfriend, wreck my car, lose my job, and it was just a regular cycle. I mean, it happened so many times over and over again. It was something I just had prepared for. Excuse me. And so after I became a Christian, okay, so here I am. I've got no car, and I had just lost the job by making a stupid decision that was sort of out of a sort of self-righteous thinking. And I ended up losing a perfectly fine job thinking I'm being Mr. Righteous. And so I have no car, no job, and no girlfriend. And so then, okay, so I get an opportunity. One of the guys has a motorcycle, so I've got transportation now. So now I can go get a job. So I get a job. And then my wife-to-be later on gets saved. And so now I've got, a job, transportation, a girlfriend. And I honestly was thinking, okay, which one's going to go first?
This is after you got saved.
Yeah, after I got saved. Because it was such a pattern in my life.
Yeah.
Well, then my girlfriend became my wife. The motorcycle upgraded to a regular car. My job upgraded to a better job. And everything just began to upgrade from there. And it was like, well, wait, I'm waiting for the moment when things reverse. And that never happened. And I can say 40 years later that it just never happened. It never reversed. It didn't mean that there wasn't problems along the way. It didn't mean that cars didn't need repairs or that I needed to buy a new car or anything like that. I mean, of course, those kinds of things, just the reality of life. But there was that reversal, that going back to square one stopped, and I didn't have to keep going back to square one and starting over again. There was a progression that began to take place. And that's what Paul's talking about is that you will reap if you faint not. And so during those times of, setback, I'm just going to still serve God. I'm just going to be faithful, live for God. Okay, this didn't work out the way that I wanted it to, but praise God, I'm not back to square one. I'm still moving forward in my life. And then all of a sudden there would be something else. There would be some other, benefit that would begin to poke its head into my life, and just continue to go on from there. And now, I made the statement last night. I said, having the longer that I live for Jesus, the more glad I am that I became a Christian. Because that's literally, I can see a steady progression, in that I'm happier as time goes by that I became a Christian, the longer that I continue to serve God with, doing those things that please Him.
All right, Kay, speaking of feeding the poor.
Wait, I don't remember anybody saying that, but anyway.
I did actually say.
Did you?
Feeding the homeless? I said, is that a good?
Okay.
So,
I missed that. It's like
saying,
when did somebody say that?
When I said, what is good?
Yeah.
Speaking of feeding the poor, it seems like people are more open to considering going to churches that are involved with charity. That seems to be their idea of good. Why do you think that is?
I wouldn't go that far to say that this is what people are more open to. I would say there are some people that specifically, and I would say that it's specifically the people that benefit from those charities,
would
like to go there. Yeah, they like to go there for the handouts. But I wouldn't say that it's because they believe that that's their idea of good as much as that's their idea of meeting their own needs. is that having pastored for, 30 years, I don't think I've ever had somebody come to me and say, listen, I'd like to come to your church, but I want to know, is there a place that I can serve? Is there a place where I can just help people? Even if I don't get anything out of it. I just want to know if there's a place for me here where I can go out and be involved with charitable deeds so that other people can benefit. That's never happened. It's never happened one time. But I've had plenty of people who say, if I go to your church, are you going to give me money when I need help? Are you going to do this for me? Are you going to do that for me? I've had plenty of people who say that, but very rarely have I ever had anybody who comes and says, I just want to go to a church that has opportunity for people to just serve.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever done that.
So Elliot, if you're listening, you should just clip that piece of the video. We need to save it for later because that's good content right there. So going back to this idea of your life kind of progressing forward and although there being issues and stuff like that, obviously that's where the scripture applies. You're living for God, which is what Paul is the context of what he's talking about. But this idea, there's another scripture in Acts that Jesus is now ascended into heaven, and the Holy Spirit falls on his people. They begin to speak in tongues. This whole crowd hears them speaking. There's this confusion of what exactly is happening. Peter gets up, he preaches, he tells them what's happening, and he basically preaches a sermon that is convicting to them. And then they say, what should we do? What then should we do? And he says, to be saved. And he says, repent and be baptized that times of refreshing may come upon you. Mm-hmm. So first off, what is a time of refreshing, and why would that have appealed to a crowd like that?
Yeah, I'm trying to be careful here because I don't want to become subjective about that idea of times of refreshing. I do believe that there's a couple of different levels of things that Peter's speaking of there when he talks about the idea of times of refreshing coming from the Lord that have to do with the fulfilling of prophecy, future, the idea of like heaven. That there's an element of that, the times of refreshing when God comes and visits, because they knew this. I mean, this was even just during that period of time or just before that period of time, the disciples are asking Jesus if this is the time when God's going to restore Israel, and so this idea of refreshing is something that's ingrained into their thinking, because Jesus didn't. They weren't. It's not like when Jesus showed up and they were all Mormons, and then he had to convert them to Christianity. They were Jews.
You're talking about Jesus during
the disciples.
Ministry. Okay,
the disciples.
Gotcha.
So the Jews were not on the wrong path. They were on the right path, and they did understand that the Messiah was going to come and that the Messiah was going to usher in peace and prosperity for Israel. So they understand this. These are prophetic writings in the scriptures that they're familiar with. And Jesus never, he when they ask him about this, he doesn't go, listen, guys, you need to stop with this Mormonism stuff. It's not what he's saying to them. He says, it's not for you to know the times.
Yeah.
So yes, this is going to happen, and so this was a part of their understanding. So Jesus wasn't actually, when he came, he wasn't coming with the idea of changing their doctrine, but actually, okay, guys, this is the next step in the progression. This is the time. I'm the Messiah. So everything you've expected that's going to happen with the Messiah, well, I'm the Messiah. But not understanding that there were pieces of the puzzle that had yet to play out, Jesus dying on the cross, and that it was actually his second coming where this is going to happen, not his first. And they didn't understand that. And so that idea, the times of refreshing, I think was more of a future thought. But there is obviously their personal experience, at that time of having been with Jesus. And that refreshing of, God's here. We're not just wasting our time believing in this stuff. God, because there's like this new chapter that's going to begin, and we see that in the book of Acts after they get saved. The 3,000 get saved. It says they come together, they're breaking bread, they're in fellowship. There's this oneness, that's coming together. You could call a time of refreshing. There's this refreshing that they're now living this new life as Christians. So it's not just that Jesus came to fulfill their Judaism, and so now he's gone back up into heaven, and now they go back to being Jews. No, they're now have gone into the next level of Judaism, which is Christianity. So you've got Judaism, and now Christianity is the next step. So I mean, it's part of the progression of the plan of God ultimately, and so there is an element of refreshing, that he was talking about for that time.
Okay, so
as well, not just a future prophecy,
right,
but that the times of refreshing may come from the Lord. In other words, God's involved. Jesus has gone back into heaven, but he's given us the Holy Spirit. We haven't, we're living the Christian life, and that's, so there's a sense of refreshing there as well.
So does that does that idea still apply to the invitee today? When we invite people to become Christians.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
how does that work practically?
Yeah. Well, the times of refreshing. Well, I mean, I know for me personally, there was a relief when I got saved, because I couldn't figure out like that cycle. I couldn't figure out. I'm just trying to make what I thought were good choices, but yet I would, like I said, I would get a job, get a car, get a girlfriend, and I'm trying to move towards growth, and then something would happen and we would have a falling out, and that would be it. And it's like, how do I stop this? How do I stop this cycle? And then usually what would happen after that is that I would be upset because another failed relationship, go back to the clubs, go back to the drinking, and then of course, drinking and driving, doing stupid things, and end up, either wrecking my car or not paying attention and my car running out of oil or whatever, and just another problem, losing my car. And so I couldn't break that cycle, in my life. It just seemed to be this never ending cycle of starting over, that when I got saved, it was like, that was refreshing, it was like that when that cycle stopped, it's like, this is cool. I like this far better, than constantly starting over. And I know people, I have met people and, that are, 40, 50, 60 years old, and they're still starting over, they're still in that cycle of starting over. And I think I'm so glad that cycle has stopped in my life. I've met people who are my age and are still going through those cycles. They are, they go down to the city center and they hear, AC/DC music, and they're back in their element. And it's like, but they never left it. They never left it. It's just, they're just older now, and they're like, man, the days, but it's like, it's not the days. Those days are still today.
Yeah.
Just the problem is that you're not young enough to enjoy it anymore like you used to, knowing that someday in the future you're going to have a life. You don't have a life. This is all there is.
Yeah.
It doesn't get any better than this. And what a bummer that is.
Yeah.
And so, get drunk, hang out in the city center and listen to AC/DC. That might be great for that evening, but you're going to have to wake up the next morning and realize, my life still sucks just as much as it has for the last 30 years.
Yeah, and you probably just don't look the same dancing that way when you did.
Well, that's
we witness our downtown drunk folks dancing to old music. It's entertaining, to say the least.
Not for me. It's very, very tragic. Makes me want to cry.
I think it's hilarious. I think it's hilarious. I just pray, God, please don't ever let me get there, man. I just want to stay saved and sane, and realistic about life. Okay, so last question. Well, we're kind of out of time, but I guess just to try and summarize this entire thing, because timing really is. It really is the big mystery here. We don't know when things are going to happen. Jesus said it's not for you to know the times and the seasons, right? Which the Father has put in his own authority. And so this idea that God has control over time, and when he gets involved, we don't necessarily know when? And so what is the proper perspective? Now you can give me it from the, I kind of more aiming towards the people who aren't saved and the idea those who don't know God. What's their, judgment day's coming, and you're the one that, for me, the one that introduced me to the phrase, payday's not always on Friday, but this idea that one day things are going to happen as a result of, or your decisions are going to lead you in these directions. And it could be a judgment. It could be, times of refreshing, but you're the one that decides what direction and what trajectory. And so my last question is, what is the right perspective to have when it comes to the issue of time and God working and God's will?
Well, again, it's going to be a bit subjective, because when I look at my life, I wish that every Christian could experience life the way that I've experienced it. I just obeyed. Because I wasn't raised in religion, I didn't have to unlearn anything, because I didn't know anything. And so everything I learned from having met Jesus. And so I didn't never have to work out, religious tendencies, or false religious ideas. But, just letting God be God in your life, and just submitting yourself to the process of transformation, of coming out of sin, and we are all sinners, and we're all in progress. But that needs to be the way, is always being ready to be willing to change, so that those times of refreshing can come. And so, it's funny, because I talk to people about Jesus, and I've prayed with people, and I've said, and I've shared my testimony. Jesus changed my life. I woke up the next morning, I was a completely different person. And I've talked to a lot of people, and I've prayed, and then they wake up the next morning and they think, I'm not any different. And I ask them, I always ask them, so, when you say you're not any different, what do you mean? I mean, because it could be that you don't want to change. That you're not willing to change. Where I was, when I prayed that prayer, it was, God, if you want me to be a completely different person, I'm happy to do that, so long as I know that you're real. I don't care, I don't need to hang on to anything. I'm willing to become a completely different person. I'm willing to forget my whole existence. If I know that you're real, I'm quite prepared to do that. And so the next morning I did wake up a completely different person. I didn't have to work out stopping sin in my life. It was something that I just had to kind of, realize that, wow, this sudden change in my life is real, and that I'm not going to go back to my old ways, and that what's happened in me was God, and that God had done something. And so that, I think, really has to be the approach to things. Is there really has to be that kind of an approach that says, I am going to just surrender to this. I am not going to try to negotiate a deal, with God, and, that I'm going to still hang on to some things. And I think why that has happened with other people. There was one girl in particular. I had texted her, hey, so what happened? Anything happened last night? And she said, I'm still kind of waiting for something to happen. And then I think I talked to her a little bit later in that afternoon, and she said, I don't think Christianity's for me, but thanks for the opportunity and the experience. And so I didn't try to fight with that. There was nothing to fight with, because she's walking away, and I thought, she doesn't really want to change. It's not that she didn't really want to change, but she doesn't really want to know God. It just really isn't there. She doesn't really have a real desire to know whether or not God is real, because if she had, then I'm quite confident that, that she would have had that experience, because this isn't, God doesn't play favorites. But I think it's a heart issue, is that we want to play games. Well, okay, all right, God, I'm willing, but, you're going to have to convince me, that this is the right thing to do. Where that wasn't the thing with me. It was, I wake up the next day and I know that everything I'm doing in my life is wrong. I know this, and I'm prepared to stop. I don't want to do it anymore, because the idea of it being wrong, I don't want to do it anymore. Whereas I think that a lot of what happens to people is that, okay, it's wrong, but I still want to do it. And I think that's where the problem really lies, and why they don't experience God is because they still want to do wrong. And they're hoping somehow that they can have this compromise between still being able to do things they know they shouldn't do and having God show up, So I think there has to be that kind of posture that just says, no, I'm not going to try to play games with this. I'm in. And if God's real, okay. If he's not real, okay. But not if he is real, I'll see if I can swing a deal with him.
Yeah, very good. All right. Well, we're out of time. We appreciate you guys joining us. Invite folks to these, send them the link. We are here to help. And the whole purpose of these podcasts is definitely not just, entertainment or to put on some kind of show or just to have an event that we do as a church to get our name out there. This is to help you. And so Pastor Ford mentioned it last week. If you have things that you'd like to see, pulled up as a topic, if you can throw those in the comment section, the comment section. We can.
You're talking and I'm being seen. I'm not sure. You must. I think you're kind of talking.
Test 1 2 test.
Talking
yeah, there
quietly.
We go. Okay,
there, try that again.
Yeah. Okay. So don't talk. So anyway, if you'd like to hear us talk about a certain topic, maybe there are questions you have that maybe you're too shy to put them in the chat box. It's totally fine. You can put the a topic or even a question in the comment section, and we can format that into a podcast topic itself, or just join us in the future, and we will see everybody soon. Just to let you guys know about our upcoming service tomorrow night. We always have a midweek service, and so we invite you to join us in person for you can experience this for yourself. This isn't just a theoretical or hypothetical. This is real. God's real, and he's personal, and he will meet you here if you give him that step. God will meet you here. You're coming, you have an open heart. God will touch you. He'll help you. And so we invite you to join us tomorrow at 7:00 p.m. We'll be here at 1100 Industrial Road. We are in Suite 10, and come and join us in person, and we will see everybody soon.